Okay, so this is the second uh, presentation that we're doing uh, via recording or pre-recording. Let's go on now with chapter 3, which is the sources of research ideas, the sources of research ideas. Where do we get research ideas from? One of the first places, of course, is everyday life. You see something and you see something again and you see something again and you say, well, I wonder if there's some trend to that. I wonder if what I'm seeing is based upon some underlying cause or reason. And then, of course, there's a reason to do research on that. And uh, some of the most profound ideas have just come from research of everyday life, all the way from natural science and physics and chemistry and everything, all the way through behavioral sciences and sociology and psychology. Then, of course, we look at practical issues, workplace and morale, job placement, new therapy techniques for mental illness, eyewitness identification. Another excellent source of research, of course, is past research, looking at past research and at theory. What is a theory? The term theory uh, in colloquialism is misused quite a bit. People say, "Oh, I have a theory that such and such and such and such." And that's not really a theory. That's a guess, uh, um, an assumption, a hunch, an intuition, at best, a hypothesis. So a theory is really a statement of understanding that explains uh, 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 reality and confirms reality through experiment. Theories are based upon a large compilation of data, and a theory is always meant to predict an outcome. So what's on the screen here, a theory is a statement or group of statements that explain how or why some part of the world works. And indeed, it's uh, based upon prediction. So if you do an experiment with an underlying theory, your experiment should predict the outcome of a theory. Now, theories in science are meant to be disproved, or at least expanded upon, not completely thrown out the window, unless, of course, your theory is that the four elements are earth, wind, fire, and water. Then perhaps just a little bit of experimentation will throw that out. But if, let's say, you have a theory, as many other scientists have had, that is based, let's say, upon acceleration, uh, then some of those theories may be expanded upon, as, for example, Einstein did, or Copernicus did, or Kepler did. One of the main issues affecting research ideas, and this is an all-consuming problem, uh, especially with any uh, primary investigator of any kind of research, is bias. And that is overlooking research ideas because of personal preferences or demographic influences. You have a pet idea, you have a pet hunch, you have a pet hypothesis, and of course we want to see it work. And so bias, removing bias is very important in any research. You have to remove yourself and remove your predilections from the theory, from the research. So when we're looking at the influence of, let's say, for example, we're looking at the influence of maternal work outside the home on children's psychological welfare, but not paternal work outside the home. So the whole sphere of influence has to be taken into effect. And we have to be, any research has to be capable of being scientifically investigated. So as it says here, quoting science ideas, we have to be capable of being, they have to be capable of being confirmed or refuted. But this is one of the problems with pseudoscience. Uh, 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 I may believe that unicorns exist. I've never seen a unicorn, but I believe that somewhere they exist. And uh, now this could be refuted if you take into consideration evolution and take into consideration uh, archaeology, take into consideration uh, 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 physical anthropology and everything that's been dug up over the past that's lived over the past several million years, but still, one might say to me, I might say to you, well, prove that they don't exist. So that may be they may exist on some other world or some other planet or something like but it's not scientific. I can't you can't refute it or confirm it. So it's something that's basically ridiculous. Uh, uh, this also excludes issues of morality or religion, uh, uh, especially religion. Issues in religion can't necessarily aren't really subject to scientific investigation. We could argue that point, but since this is a recording, we'll proceed. So the review of the literature. Uh, now, I am going to assume that many, if not most of you, have done literature reviews before, and if not, uh, uh, we may in fact do some literature review as well, just some mock literature review. Maybe somebody has an idea about something, and then we'll do a screen. I'll do a screen share, and we'll do a literature review. Let's say in Psych articles. Uh, but the first point of research, of course, is if you have an idea, if you have a hypothesis, is a literature review. So what's the purpose of a literature review? It's to identify the topic that anything that has been researched, and most things have been researched to some degree, uh, uh, provide design ideas, meaning the research design. And we'll get more into detail as far as what research design means later. uh, uh, Identify methodological problems with whatever your research proposal is. What are some of the methodological problems? Uh, 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 can we do a real cause and effect research? Are there any threats to the validity of the research? All of the methodological problems associated with it. And of course, the number one thing that one always has to consider again is bias. Identify special needs in terms of the research participants or equipment, the types of instrumentation or tests that you're going to use, and of course to provide information for the research report itself. Because if you do research, no matter what the outcome, one needs to make that information available to the public. So when we research the literature, we want to, of course, familiarize yourself with your campus library or your institutional library and define your topic area and keywords for research. And again, I hope that we are able to do maybe some live research next Saturday so that we can look at somebody's research idea, identify keywords for it, and then include those keywords in the research. We want to, of course, identify objectives. So this is basically stating your hypotheses. Are you familiarizing yourself with the topic? Are you looking to help you develop a methodology? And then doing the search itself, books, journals, electronic databases, and as I mentioned, we'll use PsycInfo or Psych articles. And then, of course, internet resources, email, list servers, the web, various search engines. This is an important area that I find that many students and novice researchers fail to do. They say that they're interested in some research topic, and then they state a topic, and it's extremely broad. Now I've got one example here that shows how a search topic can be honed down, but I often hear somebody says, well, I'm interested in depression, or I'm interested in how alcoholism affects the family, or something like this. Extremely broad topics. In this particular example, one may be interested in gender equality in the workplace. Very, very broad topic. So then you might hone that down and say, well, I'm interested in gender inequality in male-dominated workplaces. Still a very broad topic. Hone it down to gender inequality in the construction industry. Now, of course, the construction industry is a male-dominated workplace. So how would we research gender inequality in the construction industry? And even that is a broad topic because there are many different demographics and locales and different types of construction industries, in fact. So then you might say, well, gender inequality on construction sites. And then I would go so further as to say gender inequality on a specific company's construction sites, let's say Kiewit in Los Angeles. So, and then you might compare that to other construction sites, let's say Kiewit construction sites in Birmingham, Alabama. So how would the two vary, and would they vary based upon other local demographics? So again, very, very important to hone research topics. A very broad research topic not only will ultimately fail to provide answers, but when you do a literature review, you're going to get thousands and thousands of hits. When we evaluate web pages, some of the main problems with information to the web, of course, is the validity of the information. Let me take a sip of coffee here. Validity of the information. How do we know that the information that we're getting is valid? What's the source of this information? Of course, the whole idea of fake news is on everybody's minds and in the news quite a bit. And indeed, what is fake news or fake information but invalid information that's not accurate? So you need criteria to help you evaluate the validity of information that you get off the internet, off the web. Number one, what is the authority? The author and the credentials, what preferred domains are you getting them from? And preferred domains are edu, .org, and .gov, and the qualifications of the publisher of the page. The second is accuracy. Credentials and email addresses for contact, purposes of the information, or in other words, if somebody doesn't give you any kind of contact information so that you can ask them questions or ask them, well, where'd you get this or where'd you get that? That right there is suspect. And determine if there's an acknowledgement of limitations of the information, or if this in fact is all-encompassing information and is absolutely true and valid. Of course, if anybody says that, you might want to reject them as a source right there. So, little cartoon there I thought was funny because in fact I think that teachers do often run into things like this. So when you evaluate a web page, consider the acronym CARP for currency, authority, reliability, and purpose. Currency, how current is it? How new is it? Authority, and by authority, I don't mean dogmatic authority. I mean authority as far as expertise, the reliability of the information, and its purpose. Is it purpose to persuade or dissuade you, or is it to educate in a beneficial manner? A third criteria to help you evaluate validity is the objectivity of the information. Identifying any evidence of bias. Advertising, of course, would suggest bias to sell something. And if you'll note as you surf the web sometimes, or if you're looking at news, sometimes you'll get a pop-up or you'll see something that sounds really interesting and it draws your attention. And if you look very carefully, because you do have to look very carefully, because advertisement is shown, but it's usually very, very small. Or if it's difficult to close a page, you have to look around and find the X or some way to close the page. It's probably an advertisement, and clearly there's a bias there. Anything that's an advertisement is an obvious bias. And is the information traceable to factual information or references? And do the author's opinions suggest bias? And again, many authors, and unfortunately, even if the author has some authoritative basis, a lot of times authors' opinions do suggest bias. You really, really want to believe something is true. You've been moved by something. Of course, being moved by something is, you might want to examine that even as a source of bias. Look for regular updates on the web page. Is the web page in fact current? One of the fifth criteria, of course, is coverage, being able to view the information without paying fees or having additional software requirements. A lot of these databases do require fees, not necessarily software requirements, but fees. For example, the APA's PsycInfo, it's got almost all of the psych and sociological journals that there are, peer-reviewed journals, but it could be expensive. Of course, the exception is it would be scientific journals. You should be able to access them through the library's website for no additional cost to you. A lot of schools, most schools do have the most outstanding scientific journal databases available to you, and it shouldn't cost you anything. I don't know about CIIS. They probably do have some outstanding peer-reviewed journal article databases. In looking at the feasibility of the study, clearly time, expense, and ethical issues, other issues to determine conducting the study is it possible and practical? Expense and time are a couple of the major issues in doing studies. Now, for example, I mentioned, let's say we look at studying the effect of alcoholism in the family, and let's say you hone that down to the effects of an alcoholic father. Let's say you wanted to look at the difference between two alcoholics and one alcoholic within the same family, and you wanted to see the effect of siblings between raised in that family between 3 and 10 years, and developmental issues regarding cognitive capability. Now, how would you do something like that? Well, doing a longitudinal study like that would be difficult, because first you'd have to go out and find the selection, the families that would cooperate. How in fact do you find couples and siblings like that? It would be very, very difficult just in the selection process. So an experiment like that would probably involve some kind of a cross-sectional research where you sample a very, very large population, and then out of that population you find members who in fact grew up in that environment. Now that ceases to become a real experiment and goes into the quasi-experimental stage, which isn't a bad thing. It's just more difficult in experiments like that to determine cause and effect. So any kind of longitudinal study, or any kind of a study that where it's difficult to extract your sample from a population because of time, expense, or ethical considerations is problematic. But then again, all is not lost. You can do other kinds of experimental methodologies in order to find what you need. An example here, that I've got here, studying the effect of being sexually abused as a child on the stability of later marital relationships. And this is an important issue. How do you study that? Well, it's maybe difficult to identify individuals who were sexually abused. Uh, uh, and by the way, I have a study on this. Being sexually abused is an ethically sensitive topic. Even asking people can be a sensitive issue. You have to follow the individuals for years until they marry. So clearly, this excludes itself from a longitudinal study. It would be both time intensive and expense intensive. And of course, the assessment of marital stability requires expertise in that area. How do you operationalize marital stability? What exactly is that? So, psych articles or psych info for literature review on the effect of being sexually abused as a child on the stability of later marital relationships. If we were to do this, and we could, in fact, can do it on Saturday if you like, we would want to use childhood sexual abuse and marital relationships. And that even that is going to generate a whole bunch of hits. So when we define a research problem, we have to have an interrogative sentence that states the relationship between two or more variables, or in other words, the hypothesis. Uh, Basic examples: can a group induce a person to deliver punishment of increasing severity to a protesting individual? This is the Milgram experiment, which the movie Experimenter you're going to watch in a week or two, couple of weeks. That is exactly what that is. Do space aliens influence the behavior of college students? Might be another example of research. You can maybe surmise the difference between the two and ask yourself whether or not one can be studied and the other can't. The criteria for good research problems: variables should express a relationship. It has to be stated in a question form, and it's capable of empirical testing, which involves quite a bit. The specificity of a research question, and we've been hitting at this idea even when we talked about honing your research idea. So what's a vague question? What effect does the environment have on learning ability? That's a vague question. Okay, yeah, okay, you may know the environment may have some effect on learning ability, that some people learn or, better in different environments. But you haven't, by saying that, we really haven't said much. It sounds good, but what is learning? Is learning involved comprehension? Is it memory? Does it allow one to synthesize information better? Does it have anything to do with creativity? So to what degree does it have any effect on cognitive or emotional maturation processes? We have to operationalize learning, and then we have to determine exactly what part of learning we're talking about when we ask a question like that. And then the environment. What does that mean? Does that mean global warming, or does that mean the temperature in your room being adjusted between 72 and 76 degrees Fahrenheit? Does it have something to do with the lighting and the temperature, the lighting and the wavelength of the light? Do maybe people learn better in a blue tinted light rather than a strict white light? Or fluorescent lighting, or incandescent bulb lighting, or LED lighting. You have to be very, very specific when you talk about environmental effects. And that's just vision. How about, or temperature, or noise in the room? Some people actually claim that they learn better My daughter's in the other room right now studying with some music on, and she claims that she learns better with noise in the room. I myself can't do that. I need to have absolute quiet in order to study. A specific statement helps ensure the researcher understands the problem, and the specific problem statements help the researcher to determine factors such as, when you do research, again, the specificity. So the factors, the participants, the apparatus, the instruments, and the measures. And of course, in determining this, those evolve. The ideas, participants, apparatus, instruments, and measurements evolve from the specificity of the research question. So, the environmental impact. Let's say we're talking about the environmental impact of plastic water bottles. What's the impact of bottled water on the environment? How does trash pollute the environment? So on the bottom, how does trash pollute the environment? That's broad. When we talk about, we're talking about the graphic on the right side here, that little table. What's the impact of bottled water on the environment? What aspect of bottled water? And again, I've heard this a lot of times. You know, if you buy bottled water in these plastic bottles, it has an impact on the environment. And okay, we believe that, but what is the impact? What is the aspect of that? What is the environmental impact of plastic water bottles? Then we have to ask, what's the topic? Plastic water bottles. The consumer? Who? What? Environmental impact. When and time. No time limit. Where? Disposal sites. Or the ocean. Then that enters yet another broad example of what's the impact of plastic water bottles in the ocean. Huge, huge areas. Be very, very careful, again, in specificity in research questions. So, research questions: purpose, theory, sampling strategy, methods. When we formulate a hypothesis, what do? A hypothesis involves the best prediction or a tentative solution to a problem. The criterion of it is that it must be capable of being refuted or confirmed. In other words, it must have testability. And the types of research. So is the predicted relationship between variables, is it null? Or is there a relationship indeed? So, of course, you've heard about the null hypothesis, and that is the statement of no relationship among the variables whatsoever. But main thing here, and that's on the bottom, here is a hypothesis should always contain an independent and a dependent variable, one of each at least. Now, you can have multiple dependent variables and multiple independent variables. Most more complex research projects do have more than one of each. So I think that that ends the presentation.